Hello, everyone. This is Haley Hansen. I'm the leader of the higher education group here at Husch Blackwell. We are excited to give today's presentation on the Clery Act and your compliance, how you can make sure that your ducks are in a row. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application icons that you can use during the program today. I'd like to take a minute to go over just a few of them. First, if you have any questions during the webinar, please submit your questions via the question box. We'll try to answer them during the webinar, but if we need to give you a fuller response, or if we run out of time, which is more than possible, we will make sure we send you an email answering your specific question. We do truly appreciate audience participation and encourage you to submit questions. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the help icon. It has a question mark at the bottom of your screen. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the resource list icon. So if you look in that folder, you can print off all the slides and use those slides. This program has been approved for continuing legal education credit in Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Texas. To report your hours in Illinois, Kansas, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Texas, click on the CLE icon at the bottom of your screen and complete the questions. Also, you will receive a recording of this webinar. It will be available to you tomorrow for watching and sharing. There will be a link with that email as well to the certificate of attendance. So we're very happy to have you all with us today. Again, I'm Haley Hansen, and joining me today is Ben Irwin. Ben is also an attorney in our higher education group and concentrates his practice on compliance and governance issues confronted by institutions of higher education. He has extensive experience with the Clery Act, and we are very lucky to have Ben's expertise today, as well as lots of other compliance issues such as ADA Section 504, the Violence Against Women Act, and Title IX, to name a few. So Ben, thank you for joining me today. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. So just as a reminder to put it out there to everyone, people call this Clery season because everyone is getting ready to put together their annual security reports. You must distribute your ASR on or before October 1st of 2018, just like every other year. And we're going to talk about distribution and what that looks like as well. So a lot of institutions are making sure that their reports are ready. Also, if you have on-campus housing, you must also distribute your annual fire safety report. And we have seen in the last few Clery audits and fines associated with those audits that a lot of institutions are missing, for some reason, the annual fire safety report. And so this is extremely important if you have on-campus housing to make sure. We've traditionally seen that within the same report as the ASR, but making sure that that is complete and that it is also distributed on or before October 1st. So as we talk a little bit more about what to include, we're going to go through from a very high level these particular statements. So the current policy statements and procedures, there are over 100 policy statements that you must have in your annual security report, including statements if you don't have a particular policy or a particular way that you're addressing something, you must also put that in your ASR as well. And so it's important to understand that those policy statements are all required, and as we've seen the most recent audits as well, a lot of institutions are being fined for inadequate policy statements. The other just very broad reminder, but one that I think is important, is that the only link that you can actually have that meets the requirements, you can add additional links, but you still must independently meet the requirements of the ASR, is to your drug and alcohol policy. Other than that, you cannot link to meet the requirements. You can do it as a supplement if you've already answered the Clery questions, but you cannot add links to actually meet those requirements for the policy statements. Also, crime statistics for years 2015, 16, and 17, and then we've broken down all of the crime statistics that must be listed as well and how you must report those crimes. Most people are familiar with this slide, so we'll go over it fairly quickly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben to really focus on Clery geography as we get into kind of the the meat of this issue and how we see schools really make mistakes when it comes to geography.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing about the crime statistics in the report. We're still seeing, or the last Clery season, we still were seeing a lot of people, a lot of schools disclose their statistics, their sex offense statistics, using the forcible and non-forcible categories. Those categories are no longer utilized ever since the VAWA amendments. So now you should be just disclosing your sex offense statistics in the report as rape, fondling, incest, and statutory rape. So just something I've noted along the way with various reports here and there, something to keep in mind for your 2018 ASR. So with Clery geography, at this point, a lot of the schools we work with, they seem to have a pretty good understanding of their on-campus property, their on-campus student housing facilities, and their public property. There might be some nuances here and there that are tough and have to be analyzed, such as a street that runs through the campus in an urban environment, or a nursing school that has a hospital, affiliated hospital nearby, and the question is whether that's part of the on-campus property. So there's things like that are still can be tricky at times, but for the most part, people have a good grasp of those first three items on the slide. Where we really see people still struggling is with the non-campus property and their separate campus designations. So we're going to really take some time here and talk about these two types of property and help you think about the various factors with each.
And then in the handbook, the 2016 handbook, there was a lot of emphasis paid to separate campuses, and I think you're going to go into that in more detail. But I think it's also important to note that we now have seen the first institution be fined for failing to identify a separate campus as well. So there's a lot more emphasis placed on this guidance than there has been in the past.
Yep, definitely. So with both of these types of property, the first criterion to be thinking about is whether there's ownership or control, and then also whether it is reasonably contiguous to the campus or not reasonably contiguous to the campus. Both of these types of property have those two factors involved. So it's really the other ones that really will help you differentiate between the two. So non-campus property, in addition to ownership or control and not being reasonably contiguous to the campus, the factors are frequently used by students and supports the educational purposes of the institution. Two very, as we'll see in the coming slides, two very broad categories to what can become your non-campus property. Separate campuses, on the other hand, even though they could really meet the definition of non-campus property, you have to go a step further and look at these pieces of property, these locations, and think, do they have an organized program of study, which we know based on from the Clery handbook plus additional statements from the Department of Education that they consider 2 or more courses leading to a degree or some other credential at that location is enough to be an organized program of study, which is, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a full MBA program at a location that results in an organized program of study. It can be just a few courses there that makes this factor be met. And the other one is whether there's an administrator on site. And we know from the handbook that it doesn't have to be a full-time administrator, and it doesn't have to be a high-level administrator either. So,
and Ben, one of the questions I get regarding the administrator quite often is, does it count that there is a faculty member who also is doing administrative duties on a part-time basis to make sure that the program is going, and does that count?
Yeah, I think that would count with really, really if there's someone doing administrative work there, and even if they're technically a faculty member, or even someone doing more of the clerical type of stuff, that's an administrator.
Exactly.
So really, if you have staff on site doing any administrative work, that factor's going to be met.
And we also had one follow-up question, which how do you define reasonably contiguous? And I know that there's been we're going to actually get to that in 2 slides, so we'll make sure that we answer that question.
We will get to that one. First, let's talk about the issue of control. So the first criterion is ownership or control. Ownership is pretty self-explanatory. So the issue of control, what we're looking for in these situations is whether there is a written agreement for the use of space for a location. And where this comes into play, the two things to think about. It can be something like an email. It can be an informal type of agreement. It doesn't have to be one of those contracts you've seen us write, agreement at the top and then provision A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It doesn't have to necessarily be like that to be a written agreement for the use of space. But it does have to be for the use of space. We're talking about Clery geography here, so it's the use of space that's important. So don't necessarily get caught up in thinking you have control for Clery purposes if the agreement that you have is just for a program. Like we have an agreement with a school to do a study abroad program there. And if it's just about the program and curriculum, it's not necessarily for the use of space, which means there might not be control. So something to think about with control. The second factor is not reasonably contiguous to the main campus. And prior to the 2016 handbook, there wasn't a ton of great guidance on this. It was more of a, instinctive type of, well, what do you think? Be reasonable about it. And that's probably still the case, but they have given us this 1 mile rule to think about. And the 1 mile rule says that it is reasonable to consider locations within 1 mile of your campus border to be reasonably contiguous with your campus. I read that and I think, if we think about this guidance, then stuff outside of 1 mile, just generally speaking, we need to start thinking about whether it's not reasonably contiguous to campus, meaning is it non-campus property or is it possibly a separate campus? So that's what the things we're thinking about for that factor. So with the non-campus property, there's ownership control, not reasonably contiguous, but then there's these two broad categories I mentioned earlier about frequently used by students and supports the educational purposes of the institution. So where this has really come out since the new handbook, and I think we'll show you how broad these categories are, is with university-sponsored student trips. And what the guidance tells us in these situations is that if students stay at a hotel or some other living arrangement as part of a field trip or study abroad program or debate club event, etc., 1 night at a hotel is not enough to bring that hotel within your Clery geography. It is assumed that is part of your educational purpose, that location is being used for your educational purpose, but it's not frequently used by students with the one category, or excuse me, with the 1 night there. However, if students stay 2 or more nights at that hotel or other living situation while they're on this trip, that does meet the frequently used by students criterion, which could bring it into the non-campus property. And then the little curveball here is that even if it's 1 night, if multiple student groups stay at the same hotel, even if it's 1 night only, that can fall into your non-campus property as well, which there's a lot of obligations that come from something being in your Clery geography, which we'll get to. So be thinking about how these student trips and whether they are included in your Clery geography. And just to kind of tie the bow up here, to be clear though, if some other institution or entity has the agreement for the use of the hotel or living arrangement, if they set those up for you, a school for a basketball tournament or something like that, you don't have control of the property, and thus it's not in your Clery geography.
And Ben, one of the questions that came in, and we've actually got several that we probably can't answer all right now, but it was a great question, is what does this matter? And the difference between having it classified as non-campus property versus a separate campus, if it actually meets the definition of a separate campus that Ben went through, then you actually have to meet all of the Clery requirements independently for that campus. So you need to, all the policy statements, everything that you do in your ASR then needs to and needs to be met for that separate campus. So it does have a huge impact.
Have procedures for issuing timely warnings. I mean, the Clery obligations are extensive. So if you have a separate campus, there's a lot to that. So now we're going to move on, and we're going to watch a few videos and answer some questions that are going to help bring these issues out a little bit more. So we can go ahead and get that first one queued up.
Max is majoring in sports information at College University, and as part of his practicum, he is shadowing the basketball sports information team. Max contacts the head women's basketball coach to see if he can travel with the team to the upcoming conference tournament. The coach agrees and allows Max to stay in the same block of hotel rooms as the team for the entirety of the tournament, which will span a total of 4 nights. College University goes on to win the conference championship, and Max hits the town with his friends to celebrate. Max and company are walking back to the hotel around 2 a.m. when a man in a ski mask mugs them at knife point on the sidewalk in front of the hotel. No one is injured, but Max lost his wallet, phone, and watch. The basketball coach reports the incident to campus police. What, if any, obligation does the university have to report the incident? Is a timely warning necessary?
All right, so now that we've watched that video, we're gonna look at a poll question to really think about the issues here. So what, if any, obligation does the university have to report the incident in its annual security report? First, none. The incident is not a Clery crime, and it's not on the institution's Clery geography. The second choice is the incident is a Clery crime, but it did not occur on the institution's Clery geography. And third, of course, it must be reported in the ASR. It's a Clery crime. It's on Clery geography. So take a minute and think about the issues with the video and whether or not you think it should be in the ASR.
I think this presents a really interesting fact pattern in terms of all of the different things that you have to do, because I think as lawyers, the question we always ask all of our clients is, we want to know more. It said in the video, that it was right outside the hotel. What exactly does that mean? Mm-hmm. Where exactly is that located? And so, in fact, and I'm guilty of writing this one, and so I will say I specifically made it vague so that hopefully people would tease out that that is important and could change potentially the answer to that as well. So let's go ahead and see what everyone thought. So looks like we've got a lot of responses.
Yeah,
I think then.
Yeah. So it's definitely kind of splitting the answer 2 and answer 3 here, and the issue is this piece of property, this sidewalk out in front of the hotel, is that part of the Clery geography? We kind of assume for now that those factors have been met. That the hotel is there's a written agreement for use of the hotel by the student group that's not reasonably contiguous to the campus. And then we know these student trips can meet the frequently used by students. There was 4 nights. And it's the broad category of supports educational purposes. But is that sidewalk part of that hotel and in the geography? If we assume that it's a public sidewalk in front of the hotel, the answer is no, it's not on your Clery geography, because there is not a public property requirement attached to non-campus property. So I think if we just kind of make the assumption that that sidewalk is public property, then no, this is not a reportable incident, even though, yes, an attempted robbery, that is a Clery crime. This particular incident did not occur on Clery geography.
And Ben, let's just switch it up for just a second before we see part 2 of this and say that it happened within the lobby of the hotel. Yeah. And so let's go to the next one.
Campus police follow up with local law enforcement and discovered that there were numerous mugging incidents that occurred the weekend of the basketball tournament. One incident even happened in the lobby of the hotel where the team was staying. How does this change your analysis of the obligations College University has under Clery?
So in this one, we're not going to ask another poll question here, but now this kind of brings out the issue. Well, so let's move this crime inside. It happened right inside the lobby of this hotel that is a piece of property. So here's what the Department of Education has told us. They say that if you know those students' room numbers, you can use that as part of your Clery. That's part of your non-campus property. But if not, you just kind of have to include the whole hotel as your non-campus property. So this would definitely fall into it. Also, it's an access point to their rooms. So that's going to be the incident in the lobby is definitely going to be a part of your non-campus property, and therefore this is a ASR reportable incident for this year.
And when you talk about the access to the rooms then too, I think you need to understand that that's stairways, breezeways, any type of access, elevators, anything like that you're getting access to the rooms. And so I think that's, again, when you move it just a little bit, there's a different answer. But one of the questions that we didn't put in a poll question we haven't talked about is that should you issue a timely warning on this? And what do you think about that?
Well, so timely warning requirements, they apply to issues where there's an ongoing threat and when there's a Clery crime been committed on your Clery geography. So in the first situation where there's the issue was on the public property outside of it, so it wasn't part of your Clery geography, there's no legal requirement to issue a timely warning. But for the second situation, there's a Clery crime, it was committed on your Clery geography. By the time the analysis is made of whether a timely warning should be issued, if the coach called the next morning and the kids were already on their way home from the tournament, I don't really see the ongoing danger of being robbed while you're out partying after a tournament. So I probably would say no timely warning in this situation.
Well, and we've been I think this is an important distinction. I totally agree with your analysis on the timely warning, but sometimes schools want to put out notifications anyway, even though it's not required under Clery. And so we do recommend that you at some point have documentation to say this is a timely warning because of these reasons that we're going through. It meets the Clery definition, and these are just other notifications that we want to give out because we notify our campus more things than Clery requires. Make sure you're not just sending everything out under a timely warning heading so that it gets a little confused, and if you ever get an audit, you wouldn't have documentation to kind of show why that you actually went through that analysis and made that distinction.
Yeah, good point. So now we're going to move to another video, and now we're kind of moving to the area of non-campus versus separate campus. So that's what this video is going to get us towards.
College University's Study Abroad program is one of its marquee programs, with roughly 40% of all students participating. The university has 4 locations the students can choose from: Venice, Italy, Heidelberg, Germany, Dublin, Ireland, and Cali, Colombia. College University partners with a pair of local universities in Colombia and Ireland to exchange students. However, it does not provide any faculty to these programs. Students can only take courses offered by the sister institutions and have the option to live on campus in Colombia and Ireland or off campus at a private residence. The program in Italy is operated out of a university-owned building, which also provides housing for students. In Italy, faculty members take turns teaching abroad for a semester, and the university also employs 2 full-time staff to assist in operating the Italian campus. All courses offered at this location are directly from the College University course catalog. Finally, in Heidelberg, Germany, the university rents space with another U.S. institution, splitting the faculty teaching load between the 2 universities. Both universities utilize the same residence hall space for student housing. How should the university report these programs on the annual security report? What other obligations does the university have?
Okay, so we're going to ask a series of poll questions now about these various different locations that were just discussed in the video. The first one relates to the partnerships with the local universities in Colombia and Ireland. As noted, there are no faculty and staff for these programs, and students only take classes offered by the sister institutions, and they also have the option to live on or off campus. So should these locations in Columbia and Ireland be treated as non-campus property, separate campuses, or neither? And again, for this scenario, for these schools, we do have the we do not have the faculty and staff. So we're probably, based on the administrator prong, we're not thinking so much about separate campus in this particular situation. But we know all of these locations are not reasonably contiguous to the campus. So we need to figure out if there's ownership and control. I think we can assume they are frequently used by students and support the educational purposes. So there's a lot of different things to be thinking about here. And so I think what we need to do, and I think the majority are on the right track here. The real issue that we need to figure out for this is whether there is ownership or control. And we can never give enough details in these examples. There's clearly not ownership. This would come down to whether there is a written agreement for use of space at the institution. This fact pattern suggests to me it's more of a use of program, or excuse me, a written agreement for the program rather than the use of space, which would not meet the criterion. But the thing to think about, and what I've actually seen a few times recently pop up, is that where there's these program agreements for study abroad or overseas locations, there'll be a provision in there where it says something about the students being able to live on campus at the institution. So that might bring the student housing facilities. There might be a written agreement for use of space there, which would bring the housing facilities possibly as non-campus property, even though the whole location wouldn't necessarily be.
So again, I think, having to look at those agreements, which we didn't give you in the videos, is going to be really key in looking at that.
With all
so,
of these.
but again, likely the answer is, probably neither, depending on what the agreement says with the student housing.
So this next poll question, the program in Italy is operated out of a university-owned building, which includes housing for students. University faculty and staff are at this location, and all courses offered at this location are from the university's catalog. So should this location be considered non-campus property, a separate campus, or neither? We're starting to see answers coming in here, and a lot of you are thinking that this would be classified as a separate campus, and you're certainly right in this situation. There's ownership. It's not reasonably contiguous. There's all courses offered at this location are from the catalog. That's going to be organized program of study, and there are faculty and staff there that we can assume perform at least one administrative function. So this would pretty certainly be a separate campus.
And again, this is where we've seen a lot of people make mistakes and not classify this as a separate campus. So now in Italy, you need to, under the VAWA definitions, you need to define dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault, and you need to figure out what the Italian law is for that. So, these become, because it's your local law enforcement definitions. So it becomes a much bigger task when it does turn into a separate campus, and you need to be aware of that, be planning for that, and make sure that you have all of those separate policy statements addressed in your ASR, not just in your tabular format.
And before the 2016 handbook update came out, I would say this was not a clear issue at that time based on available guidance. And I think a lot of people have just kind of classified it as non-campus property then, and they just kind of have continued down that route without a ton of thought since then. But with the new handbook, it's pretty clear that the Department of Education will take the position that this right here is a separate campus, which means there needs to be complying with all the other, ASR, distribution requirements, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last poll question related to this particular video. So this relates to the program in Germany, which you probably don't remember the video now, but it had essentially the same things going on as the campus in Italy that we just discussed as a separate campus. The nuance here is that the university shares and rents this space with another U.S. institution. So which of the following statements are true? Both schools should treat as non-campus property. No, that's not right. But both schools must treat as a separate campus. Maybe. The schools can agree to which school controls the property for Clery purposes, but this must be set out clearly in documentation. So what do you think? It's going to be the second or third answer here.
And in the third answer, Ben, I mean, have you seen this done appropriately? Have you ever seen this done in which they've written a document like this?
I have seen situations where schools will kind of contract as to who takes the lead on security arrangements, policies, things like that. But we can show the answers here. The answer here is the second one. Schools are required to independently comply with the Clery Act, even if it's just one location. So two schools, they couldn't contract and say, hey, this is your Clery property and it's not ours. And by way of this document agreement, we're going hands off here. But what I have seen is there's collaboration and one school may take the lead on the security arrangements, the policies, the et cetera, and then the other school works with them to get that information and disclose it to their students who would be going there.
And I kind of asked that question with a smile on my face because we have seen one school that tried to say we don't have any Clery responsibility because the other school is going to take it in a written agreement. And again, the nuance there is that you just can't do that. I mean, you can say that we're going to use their information that they've compiled, but
collaboration is great in these situations, but totally going away from your responsibilities. Don't do that.
You just can't do that. So.
And hey, this next slide, just to kind of bring this separate campus point home a little bit. So this was a school, the University of St. Thomas in Houston, Texas. They were fined for Clery noncompliance in 2017, and one of the things that they got dinged for was that they did not designate their St. Mary's Seminary location as a separate campus. And as you can see here, I Google mapped it a couple of days ago because I was interested to see kind of how far away it was. So the seminary is like 8 miles away from their main campus. It's in Houston. I don't know this for sure, but I have to assume that the seminary students probably took some of their basic class requirements at the main campus. And so again, this is not clear and publicly available information, but I have to assume that the University of St. Thomas made the assumption that the St. Mary's campus was just really part of their main campus, and either that or they designate it just as the general non-campus property. But either way, the Department of Education said no. There's an organized program of study here. There's administrators on site. This is a separate campus for Clery purposes, and they were fined for not classifying it as such. And then one last thing with Clery geography, just if you don't already, it's time to start getting an inventory of your Clery geography. Here's a chart you can consider using, but there's so many things tied to in the Clery world that are tied to Clery geography that it's really important that you think about what is your campus property and check it every year. Like around this time of year when Clery's on everyone's mind, it's a good time to recheck it. So I encourage you to get an inventory of your Clery geography. And Haley's going to talk a little bit about one reason why it's important to have your Clery geography.
Well, and I think, and one of the reasons that I'll kind of talk about just a little bit is just that you will get this request when the Department of Education comes knocking. I mean, they want to see this. And so having it in one place that you can be very clear about it is very important. The other thing, obviously not everyone's going to get a Clery audit, not even close to everyone's going to get a Clery audit, but you also need to make sure you're reminding your campus community that this is important to track. So if you do have what Ben talked about earlier, that email that gives you some control over another school, a high school for a period of time, that you know how to look at that and classify it. The most concerning is when we don't have a process at schools and they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what else is out there, what departments may have their own side agreements, and those can be very concerning because the department really takes the position that you should know all this and you should be reaching out to your campus community asking these questions.
Yep, that's right. And I jumped the gun a little bit there, so if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so one reason why one of many reasons why knowing your Clery geography is important is that you have to make a request for crime statistics with local law enforcement agencies that have jurisdiction over your Clery geography. So you have to know what your Clery geography is to make these requests. Frankly, I don't know if I've ever seen a school that didn't make these requests to their local area. It's where you get into the separate campuses, the non-campus property that aren't right in your local area where your main campus is, that we start to see failures to send out these requests to the local law enforcement.
And to work together with I really encourage you to, get your Clery groups together even within your like institutions or within your conferences if you have sports teams, so that you can help each other in terms of making sure you're making those connections with local law enforcement, getting information, especially when it comes to non-campus property of hotel rooms and overnight stays that we talked about earlier.
Yep. And so a few considerations just from the Clery handbook with these requests to law enforcement. You're not required to pay for them. You have to make them to all locations in your Clery geography, and that includes different states or foreign countries. You need to make this request on an annual basis, and you need to do so even if the agency has continuously ignored you in the past, or in some big cities, their police departments have just established websites where institutions can go to get this information because they're bombarded with these requests. Clery handbook says that you need to make this annual request to the police department anyways, even though it's available on the website. Counterintuitive, but that's the requirement.
So my favorite request was to Venezuela. The school made a request for where their students went to, and they got a response back saying, we're not going to give you that information, but don't go to these areas of our country. So I thought that was quite humorous.
And helpful, really.
Yeah, I guess, yes.
And so a few other things that we know from the Clery handbook about how to respond to different situations from the different responses or lack thereof from these police agencies. If they give you the statistics for an area, but you can't determine if that's your on-campus property or your public property, but it's just like in your Clery geography, guidance tells us to disclose these statistics as a separate caveat in the ASR. So they can just be a simple section. If you can't include them directly in your statistics, you can have a separate little chart explaining, hey, we got some statistics. We're not sure where they went in Clery geography, so we're disclosing this one robbery here, that kind of thing. If they're provided to you, but you can't tell, these are the crime statistics for the city of Kansas City. Well, we don't know if that's on our Clery geography or not. So we include a caveat, or just a statement, not a caveat, but a statement in ASR that says, we've made these requests, we got information about crime statistics from law enforcement, but it wasn't in a usable format. And then if your request is denied, guidance says to check open records laws. I know in many states, including Missouri as an example, agencies can charge you when you make open records requests, and you don't have to pay for these types of requests. So if you're just getting stonewalled, consider making an open records request, but just know you don't have to pay for anything. And then if you're just totally denied, include a short statement in your ASR that some or all of the agencies just did not even respond to your request for such.
So we'll move on to kind of the second big compliance issue within Clery, which is your campus security authorities, your CSAs. When we look at, obviously geography is the big first compliance issue. This is the second, and making sure that you have a process to identify campus security authorities, and a lot of our institutions are really considering putting a policy together about CSAs as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But just to bring you back to the basics, again, most of your CSAs will likely fall into the definition of an official of the institution who has significant responsibility for student and campus activities. And then there's, including but not limited to statements. Here's some of the examples from the Clery handbook. The Dean of Students, of course, the athletic director. You're going to have your RAs, an ombudsman, Title IX coordinator, Greek affairs. All of these individuals will be CSAs as you look at your broad categories of CSAs. So you have lots of campus security authorities on your campus, and some of these may change, obviously, as you're looking at RAs or other like positions that have frequent interaction with students and campus activities. Those tend to turn over even during the school year. So keeping track and how you're going to make sure that you keep track of all of your CSAs. Obviously, officers from local law enforcement who are contracted for public safety are there as well, and anyone, those student resident advisors as well. So CSAs at a very basic level have an obligation to report, and I think it's very important to understand a couple elements of this. Number one, under your process, how are they going to report? In what form will the report be received? A lot of campuses are creating online reporting forms, and then telling the CSAs what is the content. What do we expect to have in that particular report that you are providing to us? So is it the date, time, and incident? Because sometimes you'll have CSAs who identify burglary or some other crime that is, you need detail as to how they've decided that it's burglary. Does it really meet the definition before you want to report it on the ASR and include it, again, in your daily crime log as well? And then this requirement for timely reporting. And one of the things that we've seen, as we've seen CSAs, the CSA process been under attack by the department, is that if it's not timely, you're not meeting your obligations to keep up your daily crime log. So you need to make sure they understand that it has to be a timely report so it can get on that crime log and it can get reported to campus security or campus police. So consider whether in your policy you want to address those as well. Now, training for CSAs. It is specifically not required in the handbook. However, the department in its recent program review reports or final determination reports has said that it's difficult to achieve compliance with CSAs without providing notification and training. And so in what way are you notifying all of these groups of individuals that they are CSAs, what the requirements are in terms of how to report, what they need to report, and how quickly they need to report? How are you getting that information out to them, and what type of notification? And how do you make sure that they understand what their obligations are? And so we've seen in the last couple program reviews that came out in 2017 and one in 2018 that the department actually questioned the validity of the numbers within the report because there was no training for their CSAs. And they said, how can you make sure that your tabular numbers are correct when you're not even training or telling the CSAs that they are CSAs, or confirming with the CSAs through a notification process that they have actually reported all the things that have been reported to them? So this is extremely important and something that we see a lot of our schools honestly overlook to some extent. They're so concerned with making sure they have everything correct in their tabular format or getting those 100 policy statements right, which is something you should be worried about, but they are really overlooking CSAs. And as Ben talked about before, when you have these separate campuses, CSAs in the separate campuses, you've got to meet all of these same requirements for any of these separate campuses. So it's important to understand that as well as you're looking at this. So a lot of institutions are considering a formal policy or maybe even a procedure which would identify these expectations, be provided to CSAs, and then they are tracking their CSAs with a point of contact within each department that typically has a lot of CSAs to say to the Student Affairs Office, who are your CSAs now, and have they changed? Have some of your RAs changed? Are there other changes within the CSA population so that you can make sure that you're tracking that? Identify what are those notifications, and then how are you following up to make sure that they are actually reporting everything that they need to report. A lot of schools are sending CSAs an email once or twice a year saying, have you reported everything that you must report as a CSA? And then finally, the policies, some of them I've seen, what are the penalties for failing to report? I've seen one school that actually says if a CSA fails to report, they will no longer be employed on campus, that we are no longer going to have them as an employee on campus. Another has said a CSA fails to report and they're a student employee, that they will no longer be considered for any positions in which you would be a CSA as a student employee. That seems not quite as harsh, a little more reasonable. And then I've seen some that are taking some disciplinary action. These are just a few of the penalty options. The majority of the campuses I work with don't have any penalties for failing to report, and I think that can be kind of concerning as you're coming in and being audited as well. So it's very important. So it's really a good time at the beginning of the academic year to check your CSA inventory to make sure you are notifying the CSAs of how to file and report crimes, to work with the Student Affairs Office, especially. So, CSAs are individuals that are supporting student activities or student organizations. So let's say you have a faculty member who traditionally as a faculty member would not be a CSA, but because they are supporting that student organization, they become a CSA. And so at the beginning of the year, when you have your student organization forms, add a line for who is the individual and understand that they are going to be designated as a CSA within that department, because that information is usually turned into Student Affairs. So ways in which at the beginning of the school year you can get a handle on this. So we're going to turn over to the next scenario.
Juan and Joseph are college university students who have elected to participate in the university's study abroad program at the Venice location for the fall semester of 2018. The program accepts approximately 45 students per semester. During the spring of 2018, after they had each separately enrolled and paid a deposit for the study abroad program, Juan filed a sexual assault complaint against Joseph. Juan alleged that Joseph pressured him into a sexual relationship and claims that Joseph kissed and grabbed his crotch on 2 separate occasions. After an investigation by the Title IX office, a determination was made that the allegations could not be substantiated. Juan does not appeal the decision, but has asked that the interim measure of a no-contact order remain in place while Joseph is at college university. However, since both are signed up for the study abroad program, Juan is requesting that Joseph not be allowed to go to Italy. Juan states that his PTSD is triggered when he sees Joseph, and it would create a hostile environment for Joseph to go on this semester-long program. What should the university do in this situation?
We're going to go ahead and give you part 2 of this scenario as well, just so we can ask you a couple poll questions after part 2. So we'll go ahead and play that.
Joseph is ultimately allowed to participate in the study abroad program. While in Italy, Joseph alleges that Juan came into his dorm room nearly in tears and apologized for filing the Title IX complaint. Juan tells Joseph that he's been really confused about his sexuality, but now he knows he's gay, and proceeds to kiss Joseph. Joseph punches Juan in the face and throws him out of his room. Juan files a complaint for dating violence against Joseph. Joseph files a reciprocal complaint for sexual harassment. How does the university respond under Clery? How is this reported on the annual security report?
Okay, so we're going to ask you a poll question. How should this situation be handled from a Clery perspective? Remember, the study abroad program is in Italy, which we already decided earlier was a separate campus. So A, because a Clery crime occurring on Clery geography has been reported, a timely warning should be issued. B, a dating violence statistic must be dual reported in the ASR because it has occurred in an on-campus student housing facility. C, further analysis is needed if the punching institute constitutes a Clery-related aggravated assault or simple assault. Or D, because one filed a complaint of dating violence, he should be given a copy of the institution's rights and options document under the Violence Against Women Act. So this one is a little complicated, Ben. What do you think? Yeah.
You're going to give that to me, huh?
Well, no. I mean, I'm happy to answer. I wrote it, so I guess
I can talk about this one. So we'll wait for a few more poll questions, poll answers to come in before we jump into this. But I think we can probably go ahead and go now.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So this one, there's certainly a lot going on, and I think what you can definitely do is rule out the first one about a timely warning being issued. We have a situation here that happened clearly between two individuals, and there's no suggestion that Joseph is going to go around and start punching a bunch of people in the dorm or anything like that. It just doesn't have this sense of or that there's a serial rapist situation or anything like that. So where there's a timely warning. If you answered anything else here, I understand your line of thinking. Let's start with the second one. A dating violence statistic must be dual reported in the ASR because it occurred in on-campus student housing facility. So we did have a report of a dating violence here, and separate campus, on-campus student housing facility, all the signals are there for a statistic. The issue here, though, that I think I want to bring out is that when there's a dating violence reported, there can be more analysis by you as to whether a statistic needs to go in the ASR. Maybe it needs to in this situation, but what we have here is we have a situation where the relationship between these two people is a Title IX complaint that was filed when they were on the main campus, and then a follow-up, some coming on to the other person when they were in Italy. That doesn't suggest to me an ongoing dating, intimate relationship where a dating violence needs to be reported. That can be tricky because they did use the term dating violence. There was a sexual relationship. So I understand why, if you answered this, I understand your line of thinking. Just know that when there is a dating violence reported, further analysis can go into what the relationship really is. Regarding the aggravated assault or the simple assault, with aggravated assaults, there's usually a weapon involved or very serious injury, knocking out teeth, breaking arms, things like that. There's not really an aggravated assault here based on the facts that as we laid them out. Simple assault, yes, there is a simple assault, but it's not clearly reportable because we don't have any facts telling us that this was based on a hate crime, a type of bias, which is the only time a simple assault is clearly reportable.
And Ben, I'll just add to your definition for the aggravated assault that if someone is seeking medical attention as a result of the fight or the incident, then it can be classified as an aggravated assault. And so I just wanted to include that as well, but you're right, broken arm,
teeth, for serious.
Yeah, it's got to be something serious, blood loss, those types of things.
And then the last one here is really the only really cut and dry one in my mind, that even if there is some question of whether it's truly a dating violence for reporting purposes, if someone comes and files a dating violence complaint, go ahead and give them that rights and options document under the Violence Against Women Act requirements.
And I really recommend for those rights and options document that you have a separate document for dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking versus just putting it all in one, which includes sexual assault. Because a lot of times for somebody who's been the victim of dating violence, they read the first page that says, here's where you can get a rape kit or a SANE exam, and think you have no idea what I just reported and you're not listening to me and you're not carrying what I need. So you can meet those requirements in the separate documents as well. It doesn't all, again, you still have to meet the requirements of it, but, it makes it look a little more sensitive to the person reporting.
It takes some time to fine-tune it, and, this is the stalking section. We understand.
Yes.
That you didn't just claim you were raped.
So here's some common errors and omissions that we see with policy statements. And, again, you all have access to the slides, and you'll get this tomorrow as well, but you'll get the video presentation tomorrow as well. But we want want to make sure that you know the ones that we see most common. And again, I talked about this one at the beginning, having these links to actually meet the compliance obligations. We see that a lot. And then inadequate descriptions of your safety and security programming, your policy statements regarding monitoring and recording with local police, those types of things. We see a lot of people just omit things in general because they don't do it. And even if you don't do it, you have to write that you don't do it. If you don't have an MOU with law enforcement, failing to mention whether or not there's a written agreement. Some of you may not have it, and that's okay. That's not a Clery violation, but you got to write we don't have an MOU with law enforcement. So I would really suggest that you look at this list, because this is the one that Ben and I put together after reviewing hundreds of ASRs and think really leads to the biggest common errors and omissions. And a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory, but they're just you're failing to actually write what you're doing or even what you're not doing in some cases as well. So we'll go on because we're running out of time. The common errors and omissions regarding VAWA, again, we see a lot of people that just cut and paste their Title IX policy right into their ASR, and that does not meet the requirements. So you need to make sure that you're answering the Violence Against Women Act questions regarding your programming, we see this very commonly that people don't list all possible sanctions. You don't get to use magic language from lawyers of up to and including in your ASR to describe your VAWA crimes. You cannot do it. So you need to list all of these. And the big one we see is that lots of people list them for students and don't say anything about employees. And you have to include both. So it's not just students, it's students and employees when you have all possible sanctions. So making sure that you meet all of those is very important as well. And then don't forget that the Drug-Free Schools and Community Act requirements. And so we saw in 2017, 9 out of 10 schools fined because they don't have a biennial review or review of their drug and alcohol policies and programming every 2 years, and they have not been giving these annual notifications on the policy. The materials may be cross-referenced. This is where you can have a link. So you may cross-reference this material, but it's got to be available. And most of the time when I'm speaking to whoever's putting the Clery report together, it's typically somebody, we hope it's a multidisciplinary team, but it's typically somebody within security or safety, security, safety, or the police department. And this is something within student affairs. And so it's something where silos on campuses lead to fines, and so and you don't want to be the next institution that's fined for failing to have this as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben. I've given you 3 minutes, so
yeah.
Sorry.
Just a few thoughts on as we kind of close the door here, and you all go out and venture into Clery season prior to October 1. So make sure and get your report out by October 1. It needs to go to all currently enrolled students and employees. Some questions I've been getting a lot over the past year. People kind of hear about this requirement to also make it available to prospective students and employees and what that really looks like. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. So when you're going to your current students and employees, you can give it to them directly, mail it to them, campus mail, email, but everyone posts it on their website and then distributes a notice, which is the second way that you can do it. And there's a few things you need to put in that notice, the report's availability, a brief description of the report, a direct link to it. Don't just link to your home page on your website. Link to the actual report, and then say that where you can get a hard copy. With prospective students and employees, here are a few ways that I have thought about and advise schools to meet this requirement. Put a notice at the end of an online or hard copy admission or employment application. Put it on the admissions webpage. Put it on the HR or jobs opening website. Give it to someone after you've interviewed them for a job, or if you follow up with them in an email, thank you for your interest in employment here, blah, 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 and then at the bottom a Clery notice. put it in admissions materials, marketing materials. There's a lot of ways you can get the information out there to prospective students and employees. And if the department comes calling, you can show them that you have met this requirement.
And this is one of the things they ask for in the opening letter. How do you do this? And so this is one of the things that when we work with schools that are getting that original audit letter, they think, well, it's on our website. And that's it. And that's not, you need to look at these and decide how you want to go about this.
And I'm not going to read this all to you, but if you download a copy of our slides from the presentation, we've included a sample notification statement that you could use, really can look at as a guide for both your notice to current students and employees and the thing that you can publish on for the prospective students and employees as well. The 2018 publication, make sure you're putting everything in a single document. Still seeing some schools who will publish the policy statements here and then have the crime statistics separate. We know that this all needs to be contained within a single document for the ASR. If you have multiple campuses, technically you are allowed to use one ASR for all of those campuses. And Haley, in my experience, it is very, very, very difficult to meet all of the 100 policy statements and get all the crime statistics right for all of your campuses in a single report. There may be some redundancies if you're publishing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 reports, but it'll force you to look through them and think about every compliance requirement and get each report right instead of missing something on a campus. And then if you're going to amend the ASR, you should include a note about the change that you made for the ASR after October 1. If you have to amend it, include a note, redistribute it. That's your obligation.
So what are our takeaways? Geography. Go back to your geography. Do you have an inventory? You need an inventory. So make sure if you don't have that, that's one of the big things that you need to take away and build your inventory. Look at that non-campus property versus separate campus. I mean, Ben talked a lot about that and gave you a lot of good information. That is extremely important. Have you sent out your requests to local law enforcement for your crime statistics? Are you tracking those? And how are you tracking student trips? What are the ways in which you are making sure that you know how many student trips? Athletics seems to be easier because you have a schedule, you know when they're going to be out of town. What are the other student organizations or student trips, and how are we making sure that you're tracking those? CSAs, we talked a lot about campus security authorities, but making sure you knew who they are, that it's reviewed and updated, that you're notifying them. Lots of institutions are doing training. Again, not required, but the department says it's hard to achieve compliance without some type of training. And then making sure your ASR is published on or before October 1st. That includes all of this information, and it's distributed to prospective students and employees as well. So with that, we will just say in 10 seconds that we have, and Ben and I are the two kind of masterminds of it, I guess. We've created a Clery compliance tool set to help our institutions streamline this process and make it a lot easier. I knew that we were actually helping when one of our institutions told me they had their ASR done last week, and that they were feeling great relief that they knew they had met all of those 100 policy statements. So if you'd like more information, we're happy to provide it to you. We have received around 31 questions, and usually we get some more that come in even after we're done speaking. We're happy to answer any of your questions. We're not able to, we're already over time, so we're going to just send you email responses to your questions after the webinar, but we really do appreciate your time, your attention, and your participation today. Again, feel free to continue to send in your questions if there are some things that you would like clarified over today's presentation. I would just like to thank Ben for all his hard work with all of our clients regarding Clery, because he does a tremendous job. So thank you very much for attending, and I am supposed to give you some final announcements, and I will do that, which is that there is a survey icon at the bottom of your screen, so please take time to complete that. It's very short, and the feedback helps to improve the quality of our future programming. And as a reminder, the continuing legal education credit is available: Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and Tennessee. And you can click on that icon as well. You will get a recording of this webinar. It will be sent to you likely tomorrow, and it will be available for 2 weeks. If you are a Husch Blackwell client, you know that you can go into our portal and you can get all of our past webinars at any time that you would like. So if you need portal access, please contact us as well. Please make sure to join us for our next webinar. It's going to be on August 21st, and it is actually going to do a very deep dive into that issue I was talking about, drugs and alcohol, and your biennial review. And it's going to be a great webinar, so we hope that you can join us on the 21st. So with that, this concludes our webinar, and thank you very much for your time and attention.